All right, now let's play this trailer. The Army values, the Warrior ethos, coaching, and therapy. This is Warrior Leadership. This is Warrior Leadership. We're back for another week of Warrior Leadership. I'm JJ Hardy.
And I'm DB.
And we got DB the therapist over here in the house. And today we have a really cool topic that we're going to discuss. It's part of our social skills series, and we're going to talk about connection and camaraderie. So you articulated that really well. I know we developed a list of things that we wanted to discuss today, but DB, you articulated that really well earlier. What does that mean to you when I say connection and camaraderie and as it relates to social skills?
Man, connection and camaraderie, man, is huge. You know, there's been research for ages that talks about the benefit of human connection. As a matter of fact, often individuals quote Charles Darwin, which is the theory of relativity, but this idea of survival of the fittest. And you would know that a lot of that research and that information, if you really dig into it and not just listen to the soundbite of survival of the fittest, he talked a lot about social connection and attachment. And so a lot of the attachment theories that we have today, like an individual named John Bowlby, who wrote a lot about attachment theory, it had a lot of the, I think the rudimentary understanding of attachment comes from that, you know, just the idea of survival of the fittest and how as species do we survive. And I think in society, and especially in more of like Western culture, we have more of an individualistic view of culture, but collectivistic cultures, and I'm not making a political stance or anything like that, but collectivistic cultures focus more on connectivity, which is our natural state as human beings. And I know we're going to get into details, and this is foreshadowing about the idea of tribes. And that's where tribalism comes from, the need to be a part of a group. And if you read, you know, and study like different sociologists and things like that, they may have different theories on how that looks, but in reality, at the end of the day, the core of what sociology is about connection and connectivity with other people, right? So that connection and camaraderie is a human need. Matter of fact, it's actually a portion of the wellness wheel, which is, you know, social connection.
So that leads us on perfectly, I think, to our first topic. So let's go ahead and relate this, because I'm a executive leadership coach. So when I think of connection and camaraderie, you know, what about the lack thereof? And when we think the lack thereof, there's isolation. Now, there are a lot of people that don't really want to engage with others at work. And I think that wasn't probably the way it starts, and it might not even be true. I think that is bred from having negative experiences with other people and maybe not trusting them. And as a result of that, they tend to isolate themselves because they don't want to be hurt. And when they isolate themselves because they don't want to be hurt, well, if that's more than what the chances are, if there's one person like that, other people probably feel that way to a certain extent. And so that bleeds into the camaraderie or the lack thereof. So, you know, this whole idea of connection and camaraderie is really, really important. And we'll go into the tribes and stuff like that in a little bit. But, you know, that's the basics of it in the workplace and if it's like that at work, well, it's definitely like that in your house. I mean, kids will isolate from their parents when they have a negative experience. Well, they isolate from their parents anyway because they don't want to deal with their parents. But that's normal, I think.
Yeah, that definitely. So that you're right. That isolation that teenagers do is we call it separation individuation, where they're just trying to develop an identity separate from their parents. and they end up coming back. But isolation, from the point of view that we're talking about, is isolation to the point where there will be negative health effects to
Yes.
you if you isolate. And so I want to debunk a rumor here, and we could go back and forth with these individuals that think some individuals will say, well, I'm an introvert, so that's why I isolate. Well, introvert and extrovert is about personality type, but isolation and connection is about human relationship. And so being introverted doesn't necessarily mean that being introverted doesn't necessarily mean that you have a past to isolate yourself. And so I think it's so important for those individuals who, I'm going to just say it, I feel like the people I've worked with in counseling, they use the idea of them being an introvert as a cop out. And even I know you could piggyback off of that too, Coach, about how individuals that want to step up as leaders, they say I'm an introvert. Well, it was interesting. I went to a leadership training, and it's interesting because 70% of the leaders in that room identified they were introverts based on a assessment that we did. And so 70% of the individuals stepping up to be leaders were naturally more introverted, which is interesting because how does that then play out when it comes to you leading people? Are you one of those introverts who justifies like not connecting with human beings on that level, and you're just looking at spreadsheets all day and metrics, and that's how you sort of lead people? Which I find that very interesting as a fact. I wonder what kind of experience you've had with this whole idea of introvert extrovert, because a lot of people justify that when it comes to isolation.
Well, there is a difference between a manager and a leader. I want
Yes.
to point that out. So just because you're in a leadership position, like most of those people in that room, how many of them actually step up when it's time? And I think that's the difference between that person who has those tasks and statistics that they manage on a day-to-day basis and that they're accountable for, and those ones that step up and actually lead their people. So
Yeah.
I'm an introvert, to be quite honest with you. And I know I am. I mean, if you put me in a dark room when it comes time for me to do my job, I am a productivity genius. Or at least I've been told. So I don't feel that way. I don't think any of us feel that way about ourselves. But, at the end of the day, when it comes time to step up and do something for another human being at work, that's what separates the manager and the leader. So the leader will do anything that it takes. They'll take responsibility for everything within their sphere of influence. It's called ownership. I talk about this concept all the time. And if you own everything within your sphere of influence, if you take ownership for the good, the bad, the ugly, the successes, the failures, all of those things, then that means when somebody is having a hard time and it comes to your attention, whether it's in an email or somebody comes up to you and tells you that Joe Snuffy's over there in the corner and he really hasn't been himself today. Well, introvert or not, pardon my language, but you suck that shit up and you walk out there and you talk to Joe Snuffy. That's just the way it works. And whether or not you want to feel comfortable connecting with another human being, you have to do it for the sake of others. And that's where leadership comes into play. Now, do I find that a lot of people have a hard time with that? I do. And if people aren't addressing these things, then those people that are having a hard time with it will never get better at it. Right. That's the gap that I'm trying to bridge, to be quite honest with you, because there's no training on how to step forward in the times of discomfort and lead when you have to.
Well, stepping forward in a time of discomfort is why warrior leadership exists. I mean, at the end of the day, there are, like you said, managers and there's leaders, but I would also argue that there are leaders and there are warrior leaders. And
correct.
In the time that we're in now, we need warrior leaders and to step into these places and spaces of vulnerability with people that other people aren't willing to go. And at the end of the day, there are those task-oriented people, and then there's people-oriented people that are more people oriented. And so it doesn't they don't have to be opposing forces. I think it's important for there to in an agency and a family, it's important to have a balance of those two. What I find quite often is that people feel I think both groups of those people can actually feel isolated in their work. Like, so we're not here to attack the action oriented people. We need them because they can isolate and they're at risk for all these negative psychosocial issues that even the people oriented people, the people oriented individuals are. So like people that are more people oriented, those individuals are, susceptible to compassion fatigue, burnout, depression. But the individuals on the other end, we have to be careful because they can also have anxiety, depression, and all the same issues that the other group is having if they feel like they're on that island by themselves. And I think that's the point that I really want to drive home from a therapeutic standpoint. Both groups are at risk for isolation, which means that they're also at risk to develop mental illness if they don't check it. So the need for connection is important for both of those groups of people. And I think that's where as therapists and as coaches, we really help people bridge that gap, whatever, because people are always going to come in with these, work issues, life issues, and they're isolated. And so when we can help them get out of that isolation and get out of themselves and connect with that other person that they might be in conflict with, they're building bridges and it goes a long way. And so we can't even get to the conversation about tribes until you can convince people that isolation is not the answer. And
No.
people come up with their own narrative and they try to justify why isolation is okay. And I'm gonna call it like I see it. To be honest, it's fear. It's false evidence appearing real. And you're either going to face it and recover, or you're going to F it and run. And it's that simple. It's really that simple. And that fear is at the base of that iceberg. And so, I've heard many excuses, and I'm going to call it an excuse, over the 20 years of working in this field where people justify why they isolate. There's no justification for something that's going to ultimately cause you harm, cause your family harm, your business harm, your company harm, whomever. And so when you're dealing with people, guess what? We're in the people business as humans. And at the end of the day, you can build all the drones you want, all the artificial intelligence you want. At the end of the day, we are people and we require human interaction. And it doesn't take an article or a research article to prove that human connection is valid. Although there is tons of research out there,
Yeah.
right? Again, I talked about Charles Darwin. We could also talk about Emile Durkheim, who was a researcher, a sociologist back in the 1800s that talked about the need for social connection. Even the job that I have right now at the VA, one of the priority areas to literally prevent suicide is promoting connectedness. They literally drilled it down to promoting connectedness. The interesting thing about that is that the priority area of promoting connectedness is not just for veterans. It's a toolkit that SAMHSA created where they came up with these 13 or so different risk factors that can prevent suicide from happening. And promoting connectedness is the same for the regular community. And so, it's just, again, how much research do we need to prove that we need each other and we need connection?
Well, I would like to bring to attention Dale Carnegie. Yes. And so How to Win Friends and Influence People, it's a basic human connection principle to leadership. And what it does is it shows you that if you cater your responses in a positive way to every situation, regardless of how upset you are or how terrible somebody else is being to you or whatever the case may be, you can still keep a positive relationship in that person for the greater good. And, he caters his message to a lot of the senior leaders in the world, but some of the examples he gives, these people go through some very tough times. And some of these people that you thought maybe were the most professional people in the public eye just weren't when they were behind closed doors. But, in order for the people that they dealt with, like Abraham Lincoln, he was known to be one of the the best at this, you know, when he would have a conversation with another human being, he would always, well, he would use something that they use in cognitive behavioral therapy these days and hunt the good stuff and then respond with kindness.
Oh, wow.
Oh, did I bring cognitive behavioral therapy into this? I'm sorry.
Oh, you brought it out. Oh, you opened it up. So, you know, it's okay. Hey, that's the bridge. That's the bridge between coaching and therapy, man. I mean, think about that. I think that, you know, it's powerful. You know, winning people over and winning hearts and minds is 100%. Like, look, even if you are a technology company, you're expanding your business to, you know, create artificial intelligence for whatever, right? You still have to have a meeting of the minds with human beings in order to broker a deal.
Yes.
And if you don't know how to, if you don't have a relationship with them in connection, that's not going to happen. And so,
nope.
Look, again, you know, there are people who I believe this. They've gotten far in their career just being task oriented. They got promotions. And so I would call that negative reinforcement. I'm going to jump out on a limb and say, whoever their leader was and whoever is promoting them, you might have a good network with that individual. And so they're promoting you based on a relationship, right, that you have with them. But it's a disservice to you as an individual if you're a manager or a leader. And it's a disservice to whoever the stakeholders or the customers that you serve. So at the end of the day, that is not a sustainable plan. I know that, you know, when you again, you know, all the leadership books from the very beginning, when you think about, I believe it was John Maxwell that talked about that, how when he did this research where he talked about early on, you know, we always looked at leadership from a relational standpoint. And slowly but surely, he said all the newer research on leadership, it's changed.
Mm-hmm.
And so for us as warrior leaders, we have to have that foundation built as we move forward, not just in our work, but even with our families, right? Like, imagine trying to manage your family on a spreadsheet. Like, how do you manage? So when I get down to the nitty gritty, we can talk all day long about business and about, you know, all these other like grandiose concepts, but I would say this. My coach used to say in high school, he used to say, you guys practice how you play. Well, if you operate from only a task-oriented mindset where it's disconnected and you're on an island with people at work, the question is, do you do that at home? And if you do, you're actually creating the same problem that you're probably dealing at work. And for me, I'm saying that from a healthcare perspective. So we deal with people all day long in the healthcare facilities that have all these negative psychosocial issues going on. And so we, as healthcare professionals, we suffer from the same issues. And it's because a lot of us are completely disconnected from, you know, our families. We're overworked and stressed. And a lot of fields of work are like that. Our first responders, our veterans, like there's so many different sectors that are important where, you know, you ask yourself the question, what does home life look like? And we know what life looks like because we look at the divorce rates in our country. Like, if we really want to have an open, honest conversation about isolation, just think about the concept of man cave. What is a man cave and why does that even exist? And what's the purpose of a man cave? Right? We're talking about isolation. Yeah. The purpose of a man cave is to go and hide away and literally put ourselves back into a very primitive state of isolation in a cave. But when we had caves back in the day, our family was in the cave with us. So it's very interesting that we created a cave unto ourselves now.
Well, I don't necessarily want to spend all my time in my man cave. I just like to have a place to have my guns and all this other stuff that my wife doesn't want to see. I have to have my decorations in one place in the house.
Look, I'm not. I got you. Look, I'm not listening.
I'm just kidding. But you're right.
I know I got you. I'm not attacking the man cave and saying that we shouldn't have man cave. But this is the thing. We have to learn. Some of us, we stay in our man caves too long, and we have to come out, because guess what? They may not come in and get us, but if we're in there too long, then it equals isolation. And I'm saying, only reason I'm calling that out is because I know I'm guilty of it at times. I'll go in my man cave and I'll lock myself in there. But more importantly, I've heard that over and over again with my clients that I work with, that either they will admit that they've been in their man cave too long, or especially when I do couples counseling, oh, it opens up. The wife or their children, oh, they say, yeah, dad's always in there playing his Xbox, snitching on dad. I'm like, wow. So you're isolating, huh? And then finally they break down. They're like, Doc, yeah, man, sometimes I just get off work and Call of Duty's calling my name, and I'm like, yeah, Call of Duty is your family.
Yeah. So
and it's hard, man. It's a balance. I'm guilty.
So let me be vulnerable, and I want to get your opinion on this.
Okay.
So sometimes, and I do have post-traumatic stress disorder. So when I have heightened emotions, sometimes my control factor goes way down, and I do isolate for this. And I tell myself, and whether this is good, bad, right, or wrong, I tell myself that is so that I don't hurt somebody while I'm at a heightened state of emotion. And sometimes I stay there for the rest of the night. Sometimes I stay there for 20 minutes just until I calm down. Right. And I don't know if that's the right thing, but that is what I use my man cave for. And I'm just being vulnerable with the audience here because I think that's probably a very common example.
Yeah, you know what? And you know what? Let's be vulnerable together, because that's why we all use it. That's why I use my man cave. That's why it exists. But you asked a really good question. So there's a difference between taking a time out in your man cave and isolating, right? Isolating is where we don't come out and we don't re-engage our partner, and we stay in there, and we know. So there's rules of engagement, right? So when you're in a relationship, especially like even with a boss, bosses do this. I've watched my bosses do this where their office is their man cave, right? They run in their office and they say, oh, we have an open door policy. So then why is your door shut? Your door is closed. It's not welcoming to come in your office. But sometimes even their door is open, but then they give you this like look where it's like, don't bother me right now. It's like, whoa, okay. I was just going to tell you that, thank you for the signing off on my leave, and so I think it's a balance, and I think it's communicating, right? And I think that's where, when we talk about tribes and connectivity, right? We have to be very clear on what a timeout is. And look, we could have a whole talk about timeout. So I'm not going to get deep down that rabbit hole, but
I actually knew the answer. That was rhetorical.
I got you.
It was worthwhile to make sure we explained what the difference was, because you did talk about that idea behind a man cave, and so there is a difference between a timeout and isolation.
Yes, and I think that's enough said right there, man. Just so we can kind of unpack some of the other stuff. But yeah, I think that's the difference, man. A timeout is different than isolating. But last point, I think there has to be communication about what that timeout looks like. So if I just run to my man cave and I don't talk with my partner about that before, like they don't know that that's the rules of engagement, that I go there for a specified amount of time and then we come back and talk, then it's going to be perceived as withdrawing, which is a whole nother discussion. But that's isolation, if you ask me. If we're being honest with ourselves, whenever I've come into my man cave and she went to sleep and I didn't talk to her again until the next morning, she probably went to sleep angry. And you know what the saying is about don't let the sunshine go down over your anger, right? I mean, that's that tried and true wisdom from like the old head in the neighborhood to tell you that, because you know how he knows? Because he's been sleeping outside.
Because he's been in the
doghouse. So, I mean, in the multitude of counselors, there is peace, man. I've heard old heads tell me that all the time. Like my uncles, my great uncles, they would tell me, don't go to bed angry with that woman. That I hear it all the time. So it's hard to do sometimes, but I mean, it's tried and true wisdom, man.
Hey, man, I've been married 18 years. I think the better way to say that is don't poke the bear.
Oh my. Make sure we put a pin in that, and we're gonna talk about don't poke the bear. That's a whole other discussion, right? Woo! Sometimes
sometimes happy, nobody's happy.
Man, sometimes it feels like you poking like a hedgehog or something like that.
Ooh,
You know, it's not always a bear.
you're right.
Sometimes they have ability to morph into other species.
They do. Voice even changes. Anyway,
Oh man. I guess suffice it to say, both of us probably have been bitten by the bear we poked.
you know what? When you live in the house with different type of people, even when your kids grow older and they become teenagers, it's normal for you to disagree. It's just normal to disagree. If anybody that's listening to this for 1 second thinks that there's ever well, maybe there's a few people that are faking it. I don't know, but I don't think that there's any household out there that's perfect. I mean, if they're together long enough, they're going to disagree about something. That's just the way it works. Two people cannot be exactly the same, and if they are, I'm going to pray about that because that's weird.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's natural to disagree. It's natural to argue once in a while. To keep it that way all the time, that's unhealthy. But, if you have a disagreement that you can come back and re-engage with later and have a conversation about it, there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's normal when you live with other people because guess what? Sometimes the wife is the slob. Sometimes the husband is the slob. And you don't learn that until you start living with them. Oh, Lord, it's going to upset the one that isn't. It's just the way it works.
Yes,
but anyway, we could talk about that all day long. Connection and camaraderie. Let's go back to that. So the next concept we wanted to address, and we had 3 examples, is finding your tribe. And so this is not just, finding that group of people that you want to connect with at work, even though in a professional environment, that is very healthy to have a place and a group of people to vent your frustrations in a healthy way. Don't say a bunch of negative comments about your work all the time because, that tends to spread like wildfire. You don't want to create a negative work environment. But to talk about frustration, maybe even have conversations about what's going on at home, that is very, very healthy. Building those connections, that's the first part of it. You have to have an out. Some people work so much that they don't have any other time to really have friends outside of work. So really, when they get off work, they sleep or they hang out with their family. But there are other avenues, and you brought these up earlier. I'll let you start going into them if you want to, that if you don't have any other time and you don't have a lot of friendships or you feel like you need to isolate, there's ways to learn how to do that and places you can go and groups to connect yourself with. And did you want to go into that? We discussed them earlier.
Yeah, and I know we're running out of time, but I think this is a perfect perfect part of the the discussion to talk about what avenues are potential opportunities to connect. And I think that there's a few different options that are very useful. I'm going to start with online communities, right? Online communities, that's definitely where I go out, I reach out to different therapists, different coaches. I found people to help me with consultation through like Facebook communities, Instagram. People have given me free advice, literally through these social media sites, and these online communities are powerful. And I'm all about connection in person, but I think that's like the first line of defense, and it's a blessing these days to have access to that, right? And then I think next, when you talk about in-person offerings, I would say, number one would be like support groups. So support groups, affinity groups specific around certain issues, whether it be, it could be anything that, support groups. Next would be an actual therapy processing group. So this is actually therapy, but for a group around specific things like anger management. I know that I'm currently I'm certified as a strength at home coordinator, and that's a group that I'm going to be offering through my practice for individuals that are dealing with intimate partner violence. And so, that's an important process group. So that way, as men, you won't feel like you're alone in those situations where your anger wells up on the inside of you. And even though your belief is not that you want to harm someone, that that may come up for you, and so you isolate because you don't want to hurt anybody. And that's something that JJ, you alluded to that. I know I've had that issue before. We're both veterans and we both deal with the same things. And so at the end of the day, having a group where you can bounce ideas off, man, I can tell you the Strength at Home group is one group that's definitely powerful. I've done at least probably 6 different group cohorts, and every single time the men in that group have connected with each other. And so there's always reluctance to go into a group, but again, that reluctance has to do with wanting to isolate. But it's a very powerful thing when you go into a room and you realize, like, wow, I think that too about anger, or I feel that way too about this certain topic. And so that's a very powerful thing. But there's also groups about stress management. Like, the list goes on, and definitely, like, within the coming weeks, maybe we'll start sharing some of those different type of groups and give folks a little bit of context of what can be available through therapy and coaching as far as support groups and groups. I mean, and psychotherapy groups. But the last one, and my favorite, is a retreat, right? Where you come together in space, and it's for an intensive, where you come in on a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, you stay at a nice hotel, and those days, like, you have, exercise in the morning as a group. You work through different topics that relate to you as a man or as a woman. And then you get off a little bit early so you can have free time to be able to process. And then the next day you come right back into work and do the same thing. And then at the end of the day, you have some team building exercises. And so, that's what Warrior Leadership is really, building out and wanting to offer people, because you can go do the individual work and therapy and coaching, but if the environment in your social circle doesn't change, and you don't have healthy people to reinforce the tools that you got in coaching and therapy, you'll be back seeing a coach or a therapist and spending a whole lot of money. And you would save a whole lot of money and time if you go through this, I call it a matriculation process, where we know as the coach or therapist that this is the road to recovery. And so if you decide, like, I'm just going to get the coaching, I'm just going to get the therapy, and then I'm good, you're actually probably going to go back and isolate, and you're not going to have that necessary community. And JJ, the proof is in the pudding. So our connection and the way that we connect with each other, it's because this is a bit of a cohort, right? It's a group, and we connect with each other. And so that's why we work so well with each other, and why there's this synergy, because we have the same values, the same beliefs, and we're working towards the same mission and goal. And so when you find that tribe like that, you have to be intentional about getting in space with those people and rumbling with vulnerability, as Brene Brown would say. And I'm excited, man, because we're getting ready to launch and offer all of those things for people coming soon. I cannot wait to launch all 4 of those offerings to people in our community, so that way they can have access to it. I'm just excited about it, JJ.
Me too. And I can't wait to announce that. We're buttoning up just a few things to get ready for that. But
yes,
when it comes and you join us and you do those things, it's going to be powerful. Now, leading up to that, here are some things that you can do that don't cost money, that you can still use to connect with people. It doesn't have to be for therapy. One thing that's therapeutic is just, we went over at the beginning of the call, is just connecting with other people. So if you like bicycling, find a group of people that go bicycling, and just, you'll build connections there. We met at a business conference for veterans at the DAV and connected there. Why? Because we're both veterans. We both have businesses, and we're both a little bit goofy, but that's okay too. But
I'm a lot goofy.
Me too. Just a little bit. No, but I mean, there are many things. I mean, if you like to quilt, if you like to crochet, if you like to go running, if you like to do Zumba, or whatever the case may be, if you're interested in something, if you look hard enough, especially if you're in a busy area, you can probably find a group full of people that enjoy the same things that you enjoy, and just go out there and join them. If you have that commonality, it's easier to connect. And then you don't have to talk about hard things that you would in therapy too. I mean, it's a good way to get you started. That way, eventually you can start talking about those more uncomfortable things when it gets to that point. But we can wrap up the call now. We went 5 minutes over, and that's okay, because anytime I get to hang out with DB is a good time for me. So, you have any closing comments?
No, that was well put. That last part that you just said, I really like how you framed that last piece. Just you meet people where they are. Therapy is not always the first line of defense. Sometimes it is a support group. Sometimes it is an online community. And so don't spend money up front if you're not ready for it. But definitely get off of your island of isolation and connect wherever you feel comfortable. I mean, there's anonymous groups where you can go in. You don't even have to say your name, and just listen. Like, I think if we can just humble ourselves, there's a scripture, man, that says this: if it's okay if I say this, is like, in the multitude of counselors there is peace. And so it doesn't, like, a counselor is not just someone who has a degree. A counselor is, if you break it down, is just someone who's willing to listen and provide empathy and warm regard. And so when you start to if you can find that, but you got to seek it too. I'm a firm believer, man. I seek after it. And when I seek after that, I always find what I'm looking for. And so if you're on an island of isolation, you're probably not going to look for it. So I just encourage people, like you said, JJ, use those free resources first.
Yes. Well, and then I'm just going to close it out saying the same old stuff that I always say. And the reason I'm going to repeat myself is because hopefully you actually do it this time. But if this resonates with you, please like the video, subscribe to my channel, Victory Leadership Coaching on YouTube. You can repost this, share it. It all depends on what platform you're on, but really got to keep the conversation going. If you have issues with connecting or finding camaraderie, or maybe you've had some successful situations that you could share to keep the conversation going, it really doesn't matter. There's no good, bad, right, or wrong here. Just put a comment below and keep the conversation going. Otherwise, you're going to see our ugly mugs back here in a week anyway, and we're going to talk about something else. So this is the end of Warrior Leadership. You all have a great week.